Welcome, educators. Whether you are a spreadsheet, dashboard, all things data fanatic like myself, or you break out into a cold sweat just hearing the words data meeting, it's okay. I've got you. My name is Jessica Lean, and I'm your host for this podcast, Data in Education. I'm also the founder of Data Informed Impact, where I work with schools and educators all over to get rid of some of that overwhelm and make things a little bit easier for them to make the best decisions for their students. We'll be talking about all things data culture, data literacy, and data visualization. Let's get started. And today we're speaking with Casey Watts, CEO of Casey Watts Coaching and Consulting. With 20 years in education as a teacher, coach, leader, and professor, Casey now focuses on helping leaders gain clarity for themselves and their organization. We'll be exploring her insights on creating clarity for a thriving data culture. Let's hear from Casey about what it really looks like to build a data culture with clarity at its core. Welcome, Casey.
Hey, Jessica. I am really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. I'm excited to have you. And this is going to be, we're recording this early, but this is actually going to be the second time that you're going to be on the podcast because you're also featured in the 7 Speakers in 7 Days for the virtual summit in June, which is now back then, according to when we air this. The timeline is...
And let me just say, yeah, it was a fantastic...
Of course, it was summit. So amazing. It all went on without a hitch, very smooth. Everyone was so impressed with all the speakers. It was just a beautiful event, for sure.
Yes.
All right. So elaborate a little bit on your previous experience in education. I gave a little bit of a brief overview, but give us a little bit more detail.
Yeah. I have been in education for over 20 years, just a little over 20 years. I don't want to, age myself because sometimes when I say that and I look at myself or I think people look at me and they're like, you haven't been in education for 20 years, but it's true. I hope that I do look younger than I am. And in that time, I have done lots of different things. I am a person who really enjoys change and experiencing lots of different things. And so I have had experience as a K through 5 classroom teacher, both self-contained and departmentalized. I have had experience as an academic coordinator, instructional specialist, assistant principal. And of course, as you know, I have moved into consulting, coaching, and speaking, and have just recently published my first book. And so I've kind of moved more into the thought leadership space, reflecting on all of my experience in these different positions. And I think what my core message anchors to is this idea that there's this intermundum that I think I've been a part of for so long. And I kind of use that term that fiction authors use to describe intermundum.
I don't think I've ever heard that word before, or at least that process that I've heard that word. That is a wild one, yeah.
So fiction, isn't it fascinating? So fiction authors who often have characters that kind of float in between worlds, they call that the intermundum.
Oh my goodness.
And so I think about how in my experience, I've always served in some kind of position where I was in between two different narratives, be it between students and their parents, or between teachers and teachers, or between teachers and administrators. And so that's kind of where I've learned that there is often two opposing narratives, and it's so important for us to bridge the gap between those narratives. And I believe that clarity is how that happens. I also believe that, we think about clarity so often as clear communication, but it's so much more than that. And what I do for leaders is help them bring clarity and put it into action.
So cool. You mentioned a couple of things in there that I want to talk about before we even start talking about the data stuff. So you have a book out. You are an author. Can you tell us a little bit more about that book?
Yeah. So my book, The Craft of Clarity, the subtitle is 6 Steps to Bridge Gaps, Foster Commitment, and Create Sustainable Alignment, is all about helping leaders who know their school needs to improve. So they're thinking about these initiatives and strategic plans and goals that they are expected to be held accountable to. They want to bring those to fruition, but sometimes it can feel like it's just overwhelming and too much, and they don't know exactly where to start. And so I give them the steps to not only decide what is going to be our primary focus to school improvement, but also what are the steps we're going to take in order to actually reach these goals that we set. And that's what the book is all about.
Yeah, I love that. I actually just had a conversation with someone else who's going to be on the podcast. It's going to be episode 2, Jessica Biseri, who is currently working as a school assessment coordinator. And she was talking, well, we both had a conversation about how once you get put in, for her, it was a school testing coordinator or assessment coordinator position. For me, it was more of like the data coach or the data coordinator. Once you have a chance to be in one of those positions where you're taking a step back and looking at everything, it's so much easier to figure out how everything works together systematically. But when you're in those particular groups, whether it be your teachers or your administrators or instructional coaches, sometimes it's really hard to see how we can make things work. And so I believe wholeheartedly that clarity is a huge issue, especially when it comes to schools. So love the message. And then can you tell us a little bit about your speaking as well?
Yes. So funny enough, or not funny enough, it's not ironic at all. Really, what I talk about anywhere I go is clarity. Like that is always going to be the message that I bring. But when I talk about clarity at events, my main message is helping leaders create environments where their staff can move beyond silos. And I often talk about how, we exist in these different silos for many different reasons, but so much of it is due to a lack of clarity. And it's a lack of clarity in 3 major areas. And this is what I teach about from the stage. I talk about a lack of clarity in identity, a lack of clarity in our collaboration, and a lack of clarity in direction. And so through my keynotes, I give the audience not only inspiration, but really practical tools and strategies that they can implement as soon as they return to work and try to break down the silos and instead build more of a culture of collaboration.
Awesome. Yeah, love that. And perfect segue, because collaboration is such a key part of building a strong data culture. So tell us a little bit about your experience with data and building data cultures in the past.
Yeah. Oh, man. I have too many stories, actually.
We all do, yes.
So yeah, I know we do. So I'm going to lean into one particular story that kind of segues into building that data culture. I remember, so as a district instructional specialist at my very most recent district, it was my responsibility, obviously, to support instruction. Well, you can't support instruction without first looking at the data. And so in the school that I was in, I'd only been there for maybe 2 or 3 years, and they were really well known for their community, but it's more of like a family style community. So it's a rural area. They have a strong community anyway, but that doesn't always mean that when you look into the school systems that they're functioning at their highest capacity. And so it was kind of a shift for them to put in place some new systems to look at data more intentionally, because their practice was, we're going to look at the data, but we're looking at it in a very surface level way and looking at it in a really broad way instead of getting targeted about what our strengths were and how we could leverage those strengths to support our areas where growth was needed. And so anytime they looked at data, it was typically like end of year data, those big summative assessments or state assessments at the end of the year. And typically it was we're looking only at the areas where we need to make improvements. And so I knew that going into looking at this, looking at data in a different way was going to be a stretch for them. And so in the beginning of the year, we kind of set a goal for reflecting on data much more intentionally for sure, but also that had to mean we were doing it regularly and consistently and in effective ways. Let me state that again, in very effective ways, not ineffective ways. And so when we started, it was so interesting for them to look at. We just started with benchmark assessments. Now, I do realize that's still not completely ideal, but what we were working toward was eventually getting to common formative assessments and looking at formative assessments within the classroom and looking at that data. But when they heard the term data, in their minds, it was typically like, oh, it's end of year assessments or big tests. Like that's in their mind what data meant. And so it was really a whole shift of a whole culture shift. We were thinking about shifting mindsets. And we started with just looking at benchmarks, like I said. But when they came in, and this was so interesting to me, we had them looking only at what could be celebrated and reflecting on their instructional practices that supported their improvement or growth in those areas of strength. Like, what are our areas of strength here? Were the students really successful? What were your instructional strategies and practices that affected that or made that possible?
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that we looked at that first round. We didn't even look at where are areas of growth needed, because you know what? In that moment, the teachers were so accustomed to only looking at areas where growth was needed that they couldn't see areas of strength. And they're going to be looking at that individually anyway, outside of our team meeting. They're going to be looking at that. So I just wanted to spend time thinking about what is working. And then over time, so that was first benchmark that we did. The next benchmark, we took it a step further and we just added a layer to it. So, I don't even remember what your question was, but in just thinking about supporting that data culture, in my mind, it's for a lot of people, it is so, I know we say that data shouldn't be personal, but it is so personal to them.
Yeah.
To teachers, it is so personal. We can't detach that. So why don't we take steps to give them a pathway for looking at data in a really purposeful way that still makes it personal, but also celebrates them and gives them ideas for how to leverage what they're already doing right to work on the things that need improvement.
Yes, I love that. And it's such a there's a word for it and I cannot think of the word for some reason. It kind of like throws a wrench at things, right? Because they're so used to going to those meetings and looking at areas for growth and figuring out what to do next. So it's enough of like a change up to where it's like, oh, hold on a second. And kind of brings everyone back to that like same page. Yeah, such a good way of doing it. I love that. And so, you've had you've had lots of experience in these different positions and everything. How have you seen a need for clarity in those conversations and those data conversations evolve through those different positions?
Oh, that's a great question. What a good question. So I'm going to start from my perspective as a teacher because, I know what it feels like to be in a position where there are these almost invisible expectations. Like even when leaders talk about wanting to see improvement in our data, that's not clear as to what exactly they want to see improvement in. So,
Yes.
when we just
Agreed.
say like, oh, we need to see that data improve, like what? Okay, but what do we mean by that? Like collectively, are we coming together and saying, when our data has improved, this is what we're going to see. We're going to see improvement in this area, and this area. This is what we're going to notice that students are able to do. This is what we're going to notice about our teachers. This is what we're going to notice about our campus as a whole. So I think there's just like this, again, that those two different narratives where leaders are thinking like, we've been really clear. We've told them we need to see improvement in reading scores. Okay, well, there's a lot packed into being a reader. So we can't just say we want to see improved reading scores or improved math scores. We've got to get really clear on what that looks like, sounds like, and feels like. And that's where those common goals are so important, because if we're not anchoring to some common goals, a common area of focus, then we're just kind of focusing on everything. And if everything is important, then nothing is important.
Yeah, it reminds me of a blog post I wrote a while ago, because I had so many people coming to me and saying, like, so many teachers saying, my principal says that they want to see me using data to drive instruction. But I asked them, what does that mean? And I'm not given any direction. And, teachers, we want to know exactly what the expectations are. So I wrote a blog post on, like, this is what your principal means, even if they don't know that's what they mean. Because sometimes it is like they're just checking a box, unfortunately, and they're passing that along,
right,
and expecting the teachers to understand what that means. But that the lack of clarity is just really hurting the process. So that's why I coach so much on, like, here's a cycle, and this is what it looks like with a teacher, and this is what it looks like with a teacher team and an intervention team and a leadership team, because you need some kind of system, right? To wrap your head around what that actually means. So I 100% agree with that.
And I think too, like, I think a lot of leaders, this is where the clarity cycle framework is so important, because it does give a system for creating clarity, because it gives you the action steps for that. So as a leader, as a principal, if I say to my people, we need to see improvement in X area, well, that's one piece of creating clarity. We need to have a whole lot of other pieces to create clarity so that we all know what it is we're going for.
Yes, exactly. That common vision. So when you're looking at clarity in these data conversations, or in just the data culture overall, what are some common obstacles that you're butting up against? We talked a little bit about one of them, and that being the lack of clarity when the principal or when the administration asks for teachers to be using data or improving reading scores. What's something else that you've come across?
A lot of the time it is, I think sometimes we hear a lot of leaders talking about resistance, right? But I don't know that we always know exactly what we mean by that. And so, because resistance can look a lot of different ways, and it can happen for a lot of different reasons. And I believe that most of the time when we notice resistance in our organization, it's because there's a lack of clarity. But it can be really hard to create that clarity if there are so many things that you feel like you have to focus on. So when we look at data, I think sometimes it's easy for, and I'm coming from this from a leadership perspective, but it can be so easy for us to see all of these areas where growth is needed, where improvement is needed, and it can be really hard to decide, okay, what's going to give us the biggest bang for our buck and what truly needs to be our focus. I think the other hiccup beyond that is we see here are areas where growth is needed. We have to make improvements. But not only is it sometimes a whole lot and we don't know where to start and it's overwhelming, but we also don't take the time to dig deeper and ask the why question again and again. Like, if this is an area where students are struggling, why is that? Why? Keep asking why. If this is an area where teachers are struggling, If this is an area where our school is struggling and the data is showing that, why? Keep asking that why question because it gets to the deeper root, because too often we stop at surface level. And that's where I think we run into the issue of buying products and programs as Band-Aid fixes. And then we enter into this time of like cyclical problem solving.
Yes, yes. They say there's a practice where you have to ask why 5 times in order to get as close as you can to that root cause. We've done that before in data meetings as well. And there's something. What was the very last thing you said? I lost my train of thought, but there's something else that I wanted to say in regards to that.
I was talking about cyclical problems, like it happening again and again.
Yeah, I don't know
Maybe.
what my thought was. It's gone now, but it will come back probably like in the middle of the night or something,
Yeah. Yeah. That's funny.
Insert a little clip of me just randomly talking and you shaking your head just to make up for it.
Yeah. That's great.
Okay, so we talked about, and I know you love to work with teams, and that's your thing, especially when it comes to clarity. But I'm curious too about your experience as an instructional coach, how you've worked with individual teachers when it comes to using data.
Yeah. That's probably been one of my favorite things, but also one of the most challenging. And again, I'm going to go back to I don't know that there's, for the most part, I don't know that there has been enough clarity provided to teachers about why we use data, how we use data, which data matters. Like I don't know that we spend time for whatever reason. Teachers get into schools and we have this weird assumption that because everyone is in a school and maybe they have a teaching degree, they just automatically know the lingo. They automatically know how to look at and analyze data, but they don't. Like, I don't
Right.
know about you, Jessica, but I for sure, when I went into teaching, like I went to college, I got my master's, but at no point was I really looking at data in intentional ways and learning how to analyze it.
Nope.
So that I could make improvements in student learning. And then when you get into school, we're bombarded with, your trainings at the beginning of the year that have nothing to do with analyzing data or building a data culture.
A lot to do with how to use a copier.
Yes, absolutely. I'm telling you, my TED Talk in the future, whenever that is, it's going to be about like revamping your onboarding processes because, once you get started in the school year, you don't have time to come back to it. And then we're like, oh, we've got to analyze data. Well, we should have spent time at some point really talking about what that looks like, how to do it effectively, how to collaborate around it, like all the things. There's so much you can do around data in and of itself. Like I could go on a tangent with this, I feel like, but I just think if that becomes your focus, like we want to become a campus, let's say that next year, and I'm just going to kind of run with this. Let's say that next year you wanted your staff, your teachers, and this was your goal, your area of focus, you wanted them to be able to individually analyze their data so that it impacted instruction, and you wanted them to be able to analyze data collectively so that your MTSS meetings were more productive, your PLC meetings were more productive, your parent-teacher conferences were more productive. If that's the case, then you could go through a clarity cycle framework and think about what are the steps we're going to take to make that goal a reality. And we should see, if you started that like right now in June, when this episode is coming out, you should be able to see next year all of the things that you have to put into place in order to make that possible. But just saying we want to see it happen is not going to make it happen. And our teachers don't come into schools knowing how to analyze data. They know how to look at what's good and what's bad, but there's so much more to it than that. So all of that to say, when I meet with teachers, that's the very first thing that I notice is, wow, we don't have a collective understanding about how we as a whole, as an organization, go about analyzing data in a way that matters.
Yes, so true. And what I feel like is often the answer or the response to that, and I understand why it is a response, is to kind of do like a one size fits all system. Like these are the things that you have to show me in order to prove that you're using data, and it makes me think of, I have a tool. It's like a reteaching cycle tool, and I had a person come to me and say, a state support person, reach out to me and say, like our superintendent is struggling, like our school is about to be taken over by the state. And so he found your template online and pushed out to all the teachers and said, we have to use this now. It's research based by Jessica Lane. I was like, oh God, he said my name. Not only does it have my company all over it, but it also says my name. And and that was the extent of the rollout. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my, I almost cried when she told me. I was like, and she's like, my teachers are devastatingly overwhelmed and confused and don't understand what they need to be doing. And so I had to explain to her, I was like, this tool is meant to be a habit building tool. So it is not meant to be handed off to a teacher and said, complete this now. It is meant to be completed in coaching, whether that's one-on-one coaching or small group coaching. And you're kind of holding the teacher's hand through coming up with that reteaching plan and figuring out how to look at that data. And once they get the hang of it, they don't need that tool anymore. I mean, once I got into the system, I didn't use a fancy spreadsheet back when I was a teacher, as much as I would have loved to. But what it looked like in my classroom was I would have students complete, it was kind of like an exit ticket, but it was like right after the lesson. And as they were completing it and finishing it, they would just put it up in the air and I would go around, there'd be half sheets of paper. And I just put them in 3 piles in between my fingers. And one pile would be students understand it 100%. One pile would be little mistakes. And then the last pile needs reteaching. And as I'm doing that, they're moving on to the next assignment. And once I get enough of them and I'm touching base with the little mistakes, I pull the rest of them back to the class or back to the back of the room. And we have a little small group discussion and I teach them in a different way. Whenever there's no fancy tool that I used in that situation, but I was using data and it was evident through my practices that it was driving my instruction. So I think there is, a tough balance between trying to do a one size fits all and also understanding that people need support, but not making that support a one size fits all. And really, and I think that's too why coaches are so incredibly important. I was an instructional coach as well, so that's my background also. Yeah. So I 100% am a true believer in the impact that coaching can have, especially when it comes to working through some of that data work. All right. So we talked about your speaking, you're an author, you have this extensive background in education, and your focus is on clarity. Love it so much. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yes, the best place you can find me, of course, is my website, catchingupwithcasey.com. Actually, I've started to shift that. You can also find me at clarity-driven.com. And the other place that I am primarily posting is LinkedIn. So you can find me at linkedin.com/ I think it's in and then / catch up with Casey. So catch up with Casey is where you're going to find me most places.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And I'm also adding a little freebie in the show notes, the Clarity Over Clutter. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So the Clarity Over Clutter is a free 30-minute training that it's a replay of a webinar that I did back in, I think, January. And I talk through leaders through how to give teachers what they want without spending a dime and being able to hold them accountable without micromanaging. And in that, I talk about the 3 primary areas where teachers or your campus may be lacking clarity and why they might be asking for products, programs, or even more positions, and what you can do instead of spending a whole lot more money that's not within your budget. And so it also comes with several resources that they can download.
That's amazing. I think I'm going to be signing up as well.
Do it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation. I found it very valuable, and again, I think that the whole idea of being clarity driven and trying to really nail down that communication is just so beneficial, especially when it comes to building that data culture. So, thanks so much, Casey.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Well, my friend, did you enjoy it? I'm really hoping the answer is yes. And like every other podcast out there, I'm going to ask you for some big favors. Can you please make sure that you're subscribed? You don't want to miss the next episode, I promise. And then if you could leave a review, that'd be awesome too. If you're on YouTube, by the way, there's this great thing that you can do where you just like go to the box underneath the video and type in your thoughts, ideas, wishes, hopes, dreams, and hit comment. And it shows up under the video. It is public, just a warning. But I'd really love for you to do that. Share with me. What did you think about the episode? Or what are your dreams in life? It's okay. You can really leave any kind of comment. And I'll do my best to respond. Above all else, I appreciate you listening, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.